Welcome to the Kiwimana Buzz.
Hello everyone, this is Gary here from the Kiwimana Buzz, and this is episode 61 of our Beekeeping podcast. And this week we are talking to Randy Oliver, all the way from California in North America. And hi, this is Gary, and along with my partner Margaret, we produce this beekeeping podcast from the hills of the Waitakere Ranges in West Auckland. And our podcast is about beekeeping, gardening, and sometimes political issues. And we also interview beekeepers from around the world to talk about their beekeeping and their views on issues. And the views of our guests are their own views and not necessarily the views of Kiwimana. And this interview's got some controversial points at the end, I would think. So if you've got any views about it, please comment in the show notes, which will be kiwimana.co.nz/Randy. And a bit about Randy. Randy runs the popular website Scientific Beekeeping. It's at scientificbeekeeping.com, but the links will be in the show notes. And Randy started as a hobbyist beekeeper in 1967. And he went on to study biological science, specialising in entomology at the university. He uses his scientific background to investigate current issues facing bees and beekeepers. And Randy has also written for the American Bee Journal since 2006. Randy has around 1,000 hives that he runs with his two sons in the Grass Valley area of Northern California. So welcome, Randy. We've given the audience a little overview of you, but tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a beekeeper. And around 1980, decided to start slowly building it into a living. It took about 20 years. I made the bees pay for themselves, so it took about 20 years to build the operation big enough for me to make a living at it. And then a few years ago, my two sons decided to come on board, so we've grown the operation to around 1,000 hives. We make about 1,200 colonies in the spring and take about 800 of those to almond pollination. So we do almond pollination. We sell a lot of nucleus colonies in the spring, and then we make with the drought right now a very small local honey crop. One of these days it may rain again in California, and we'll make decent honey again.
Yeah, that's terrible. What's going on? What's the forecast coming up for weather? Enough of the rain.
Yeah. So how many you want to bet on a weather forecast? Yeah. There's no telling. I mean, California's had historically really bad droughts. The other thing we do is a lot of bee research, either contract research for companies that have products that they want to sell to beekeepers, and they have me run the actual field trials. And then I also do. I get donations from beekeepers worldwide. And I put them all in the pool and spend those towards doing research, then publish that research in the American Bee Journal, and then post it to my website. So it's 100% beekeeper-supported research, and people seem to appreciate that. They keep sending me money, so I keep doing research. We've been very busy with research projects this week, the spring. We typically have, anywhere from 100 to 300 hives at a time involved in some kind of formal controlled field trial of one sort or another going on at almost any time. So it makes it a little hard to run the commercial operation, but with the donations, we can afford to do that, have them pay for it, and it works out.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. And you're right for the American Bee Journal, as we talked about before, and that's some great articles there. So I recommend everyone subscribe to that. And what's your website if people want to donate to your cause?
Oh, scientificbeekeeping.com.
Yeah, that's it. We'll keep a note of that, and there's some great articles there, and it's really fantastic. I saw Richard from Waiheke Honey just donated some money too, so that's fantastic. Yeah, I know Richard, so.
Oh, okay, yep. Yeah, they came out they actually came out and visited here, so it was very, very nice seeing them.
Oh, that's right. He has been over in America recently. I didn't realize he'd come and seen you. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And so how did you get started in beekeeping? And you've been doing it quite a while now, haven't you?
Well, the usual. When I was a young teenager, a swarm landed in a bush next door to the house, and I put on a sweatshirt and a skin diving face mask and some garden gloves, and got the swarm into a cardboard apple box.
Yeah.
And then I had to learn what to do with it. So one of my classmates in high school had a father who was a sideline beekeeper, ran a couple hundred hives. So I apprenticed to him. I did it the traditional way, to apprentice to a beekeeper who knows what he's doing. I did all the heavy lifting for him for a couple of years and learned beekeeping the traditional way.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to go. And so you're saying you're using a diving mask. Have you got photos of that?
They didn't have digital cameras back then.
Yeah, it's a good idea, but stop getting stung in the face, on the eyes anyway. Yep. Yes. So what excites you about beekeeping, Randy?
Well, I enjoy the science. I enjoy the biology. I enjoy understanding biology, and I like the lifestyle of beekeeping. I like working outdoors. I love being close with nature, and beekeeping definitely fits that lifestyle. I enjoy a business that I'm doing something productive for the world with a green footprint. So we're growing food, we're supplying bees, we're pollinating crops. And I get to work with my sons. Yeah, I like everything about it, and I find the research and the biology part very exciting because there's so much to learn still about beekeeping, and it's a field that even a small beekeeper like me can, funded by beekeepers, can step in and add to the body of knowledge for beekeeping.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, isn't it? And you never stop learning, I don't think, really.
You never stop learning.
No.
That's the one thing for sure. If you can keep bees all your life, and you'll die with more questions than you started with.
Yeah, there's that old saying, if you meet a beekeeper that says they know everything, you have to run away quickly.
You better run away quickly.
All right, so let's just travel back in time to before the time when you donned your diving mask to find that first swarm. What's the one thing you would have told a young Randy about beekeeping then?
Oh, nothing. I was the first one in my family, so I knew nothing about beekeeping. I was a born biologist. In elementary school, my father was a high school teacher, and he would take me over to the high school, and I would hang out with the biology teachers then. And I read his college biology textbooks when I was a very young child, and lived outdoors. And so I was a born biologist, and beekeeping just fit right into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's fantastic. And so, if going back in time, then what would be the one book you'd recommend yourself? If you had one book, could suggest one book.
Well, wait, a book for recommending for what?
Oh, for just keeping bees in general.
For keeping bees. Boy, you know what? There's a book called Beekeeping Tips and Topics by Elbert J. Cox.
Yeah.
And it's actually a free download now, I believe. I really enjoyed that book. That one was very influential to me in my early days of beekeeping. It was very practical, and I'm very much, even though I approach beekeeping from a scientific, biological aspect, what I like is the practical application of that. So I like practical beekeeping books. I like the old reading the old books, old Doolittle, old Miller, Date Ant, the books in the late 1800s. Those guys were incredible beekeepers, and they understood bees very, very well. Now, through the lens of today's scientific knowledge, we know things that they didn't know, but they knew how to keep bees very well back then. But that was all before Varroa. Once Varroa showed up, everything changed in beekeeping. And as you guys learned in New Zealand, is you got your first silver bullet, the apistan strips, which made beekeeping easy again for a few years until that fails, and then it gets hard again. And it was interesting visiting New Zealand right at the time when apistan was starting to fail, and seeing what you guys were doing then. It was like deja vu to me. It was like going back 10 years. You guys, the beekeepers in New Zealand, were asking all the same questions, trying all the same things that we had done in the United States 10 years before, and the Europeans had done several years before us. And it's amazing how beekeepers tend to reinvent the wheel. The questions I was getting from the New Zealand beekeepers were things they picked up off the internet that were 10 years old. And I said, guys, look at the date on these things. If those things worked, we'd all be using them. But the point is that, yeah, they were on the internet, 15 years ago. We tried them, and a lot of them didn't work. So you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. You can learn from our experience instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that American beekeepers are any kind of fantastic beekeepers, just that we've been there, we've done that. We can tell you what doesn't work.
Yeah, well, you've been through that experience, haven't you, in the past? Yeah. So, absolutely. I mean, that's one good thing about the internet nowadays, is that you can learn from other people around the world, and that's kind of what our podcast is about. So, I try, learn from different people in different places. And in the olden days, used to take you a month to get a letter, didn't it, from overseas?
Right. The one problem with the internet is there's no editor. There's no editors.
No.
Which means that, okay, so I mean, the rule in beekeeping, the axiom in beekeeping, if you want to get a clear, short answer to any beekeeping question, always ask a second-year beekeeper, because those are the ones that have all the answers, and they're the ones that post a lot on the internet.
Yeah.
So take whatever you read on the internet with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
In the U.S., it's the commercial beekeepers. Some people give the commercial beekeepers a hard time, but these guys, they love their bees and they do it for a living. And if you do something for a living, you do things that work, and you tend, after a while, to not do things that don't work. So people who are not doing beekeeping for a living, that do not need to get a return on investment, they can play with a lot of other things, and they often can fool themselves to think that something is actually working because you don't have a bank account to tell you whether or not it's working or not. Whereas commercial guy, if it's not working, you start losing money and you see it's not working.
Yeah, exactly.
What I find is the hobby beekeepers can learn a lot from the commercial beekeepers, and vice versa. The commercial beekeepers can learn from the hobby beekeepers. But I guess the point is, on the internet, be careful what you listen to there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is, I think you might have said it, is that all beekeeping is local.
Very much so.
Yeah, exactly. So it's awesome. Yeah, and you got to use something that's going to work in your area and just get ideas from the internet, but don't just try stuff on a small scale and see how it works for you.
Yeah, I'm amazed sometimes. I was talking to my sons just yesterday about this, that we were trying a new mite treatment, and we had tried it on 8 colonies, and we killed 4 of them. So,
oh, wow.
And my sons were looking at that. I said, what amazes me is I talk to these commercial guys, and they'll try something new, and they'll try it on 1,000 colonies for the first try. And I said, I'm just amazed that anybody tries something for the first time on 1,000 hives. I mean, I would try it first on 10 hives and then see how it works for you, because
absolutely,
if it, it's really easy to hurt colonies. So, we've been doing it this late summer. We allowed some yards of bees to let the varroa levels get high. If you're doing any kind of trials on varroa treatments, it's very hard to get meaningful results if the mite levels are relatively low, because you don't have enough difference, don't have high enough mites to calculate efficacy of mite control. Because if they start low, going from 3 mites to 1 doesn't tell you much. Going from 45 mites down to 2 mites, that tells you a lot. So you have to allow some colonies to build up high mite levels, and yes, that costs money, because a lot of those colonies won't make it through the winter. Yeah. And then we try the various treatments, and what we'll do typically is, if you're going to try a treatment, try it at a high range, find out what the bees can tolerate, which means you're going to wipe out some colonies. You're going to find some colonies that that you may not kill them, but you certainly hurt them. So then you start backing down. You find out, well, how high level of treatment can you use on those colonies? Then you find a safe level that you don't see the adverse effects on the colonies, and then you can start experimenting to see what it actually does with the mites. And any of this kind of work is very tedious work. You need to get a routine. You need to be able to take mite samples, to label everything very well, to keep careful records. I built a mite washing table so we can wash the mites from bees for multiple samples at a time. And you have to make it like an assembly line. And then you have data sheets all printed off and fill everything out. And then you put it all into Excel, and then you can start playing with it. And then you actually get some meaningful, usable data that you can use in the field. As opposed to most beekeepers, they'll try something once, and they'll do it kind of half-assed, and they don't run a control group, and they go, oh, wow, this worked, this didn't work. Well, if they thought it didn't work, and I saw this with a number of New Zealand beekeepers also. Yeah. They tried something one time and said, oh, this does not work in New Zealand, and that's it. For the rest of their life, they say that does not work. And one thing that I mentioned at one of the conferences is, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If there's a treatment that works throughout the rest of the entire world, and beekeepers have been using it for many years successfully, and you try it one time in New Zealand, and you say it doesn't work, it's not because the treatment doesn't work. It's because you gave up too early. It's because you didn't learn how to tweak it for your local conditions. You didn't learn how to use it. So that's an important thing, is don't give up. Don't Don't just try something once and give up. Really learn about it, and especially if you're trying it once in a non-controlled trial, without running a control group, an untreated group to compare to. There's ways to set up scientific experiments. If anybody's interested, I'm working on a document now on how to run scientific experiments for the citizen science by beekeepers. I'll be posting it to my website soon, but if somebody's interested, they can email me and I'll give them my tips on how to run scientific experiments with bees.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. And so we've got some, that's some good points there, and I think that's really good. And I think definitely only gamble with the amount of hives you're prepared to lose, eh? If you're testing on some experiments. So, what was the treatment that you tested, or would you rather not say at this stage?
Oh no, I'd be happy to say we were trying a different way of using formic acid. We've been using the Mite quick strips, which I have nothing but good comments about. They're a wonderful treatment, but on a commercial scale, it's a pain in the butt scraping the strips out. If you got honey in the hives, they work very well. If you got honey in the hives, you got to get mites down, and you want something you can put on when the honey's in the hives. The Mite quick strips are wonderful, but it's back-breaking work with 1,000 hives to be putting them in there. So we were trying using a formic flash treatment applied from the top of the hive, and which has been experimented with a lot in Canada, some good success in the United States. So we wanted to try it ourselves. So we did the extreme treatment in hot weather, because when we have a problem, the weather's quite warm here in the upper 30s centigrade. And we found out how much it takes to really hurt a colony. So then we got a lower dose that didn't hurt the bees, but knocked the mites back pretty well. And then, but not well enough. When we came back after 2 weeks, the mite levels had it knocked all the mites off the adult bees, virtually all the mites. And when we dissected the brood, it killed about half or 2/3 of the mites in the worker brood. Not as many in the drone brood. Drone brood has a thicker capping, so the formic fumes don't get into the drone brood as much. We expected to have a pretty good sustained mite kill, but the mite levels came up. So the Canadian literature had said, well, you need to do multiple treatments, like 5 treatments with formic in that manner in order to get good mite kill. So we said, okay, so let's set up a trial and treat them once a week with a mild flash treatment. That did not harm the mite, did not show any negative effects on the bees with the one flash. Well, the second flash just hit the colonies hard. We put 8 of them on, and 4 of the colonies got the snot knocked out of them. A couple of them just depopulated. And I could not figure out. It was so frustrating. We just stood there with our jaws hanging, going, what the heck? That treatment was so mild to the colonies, and it says to do it multiple times. So I made a call up to Canada to one of the researchers up there, and they said, you know what? Those recommendations, they're out there, but they don't work. It's way too rough on the bees. But so even on official websites and official government recommendations, you got to take them with a grain of salt. I'm glad I didn't do it to 1,000 hives. We would have just wiped out half our hives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're still experimenting with that. We're currently testing the new HopGuard treatment, the HopGuard 2, which looked pretty good in the spring. We got some good results, and then we set up a formal trial, and was not quite as impressed with the results. So we did a second treatment in the same hives, and we haven't collected the data from that yet. So we'll see how that works. So what I do is I use the beekeeper donation money when a new product comes out. I just go ahead and I run formal trials with it, and then publish the results. So to save beekeepers money, to let them know what works and what doesn't work. Yeah,
exactly. And and also less risky for them, because they can see what worked for you guys.
Everybody doesn't have to go out and try it themselves. Manufacturers, they have money invested in developing products, and they want to get them out to market, and they want to start selling those products. And you need to take it with a grain of salt. Like there's products out there that have been sold for years, that are sold in very large quantities from the supply houses, that have zero supporting data that show that they do anything whatsoever. And what the manufacturers realize is that beekeepers are just total suckers in that many of them are looking for something magic ingredient that comes in a bottle, and you pour this bottle into your beehive and all your troubles go away. And they just keep it's the easiest sales pitch. In the United States, we call that stuff snake oil. Okay, because there used to be snake oil salesmen that would go around and sell this stuff called snake oil. So that's the derogatory term for patent medicines that are sold that really have no effect. Well, there's plenty of that stuff out there in the beekeeping catalogs right there. So if you're going to try something and you don't see the data on the sales brochure, say, where's the data? Where's the supporting data? Let me see what trials have actually been run, controlled trials by somebody that you can trust, and to show that this treatment actually works or that it improves colony health. Otherwise, you're just you'd be better off saving your money and utilizing that money to pay yourself to spend more time taking care of your bees.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some listener questions that have written in because they heard we were talking to you. Can we just go through those?
Oh, is this live?
No, this isn't live.
Oh,
no.
God, okay.
Pre-recorded. No, this is podcasting. We're listen to it whenever you can. So okay. This will be no, not live. Yeah, we've got a guy called Mac from Wakatani. He's asked, what are the 3 most important things you do to manage varroa?
Number 1 is to split all your colonies every spring. Start fresh from splits. If you're in an area where your springtime comes early enough to do that, that's the number 1 best thing. It knocks the mites back tremendously, especially doing splits that have a brood break. So we use splits with queen cells. That gives you a brood break. It also means, now let me ask you this, is oxalic acid registered for mite treatment in New Zealand?
It is, yep. Absolutely.
Oh, God, then that's wonderful. Then what you do is you do your splits and put in a queen cell, and then day 19 after you do your split, there's a window of opportunity when all the mites are forced out of the brood for about a day. And when they're not out of the brood, that means that they're very susceptible to treatment with oxalic acid. So you can do an oxalic dribble on day 19 and start with splits that are almost free of mites. It only takes you a few seconds and costs pennies. I've got a whole article on doing that on my website, and we've switched over to doing that, and we just love that method. So splitting your colonies, getting a fresh start, something about that brood break and the fresh start and putting in young queens just makes beekeeping a whole lot easier. When we have tried running colonies without that break in the spring, and we split every single colony we own every spring. Nobody goes through. When we have experimented with trying to take our overwintered colonies out of almonds and then running them for a second year, they're just so much harder to keep. The amount of problems is so much greater between varroa and swarming and other things. So starting fresh works very well. If you can't do it in the spring, you can do it later in the season. If you have drones out there, you have to work it for your own local conditions. Yeah. So the first thing is splitting. Second thing is use bees that are naturally resistant to mites to some extent. So we have our own bee breeding program, and we select every year for colonies that exhibit resistance to mites. We do not have completely mite-resistant bees yet. We still need to treat in our operation, but it's easier if you have bees that have some degree of mite resistance. And then what we do is we use what I call the brass knuckles approach rather than the silver bullet approach. Silver bullet approach is what you got with Apistan, where once a year you wave the magic wand, you put in the plastic Apistan strips, and all your troubles go away for a year. That's the silver bullet approach. Well, the problem with that approach is that the mites develop resistance to magic wands or silver bullets pretty quickly. So as long as you do that, if you're just going to jump from one synthetic miticide to the next, you have a certain number of years before that will fail, and you're going to get back to square one again. So instead of the silver bullet approach, we beat up the mites all year long. We try to make life difficult for mites throughout the entire year. So instead of looking for treatments that give us a 95% mite kill, we look for treatments that only give us maybe a 50% mite kill. So we use a lot of the treatments at half dosage. It's much less stressful on your hives. And if you use them several times through the year, we typically treat about 4 times a year. and you knock the mites back by 50% 4 times, you maintain low mite levels all throughout the season, and it's not likely to develop resistance to those miticides. Plus we rotate our miticides. Now, after I went through the first 2 generations of synthetic miticides, first the apistan strips, the fluvalinate, which is pyrethroid, and then to coumaphos, which is a organophosphate. When I opened the first package of coumaphos strips, now do you use coumaphos in New Zealand?
I don't think so. No.
Check Mite too.
No,
okay.
That's never been approved here. No.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
When you opened the foil pack, you knew what nerve gas smelled like.
Yeah, I think
nasty stuff, and contaminates the combs horribly, and it's just dangerous stuff. After you've used it for a few years, the combs become not toxic to queens, but it's hard to keep to raise a queen in those colonies. So I used the coumaphos for 2 years, and I said, that's it. That's not why I became a beekeeper, to handle this kind of stuff that you have to take the precautions with. So in the year 2000, I said, that's it. No, I'm not going to use any more synthetic miticides. I'm going to try to learn to keep bees, not as an organic beekeeper, but to use natural treatments, biotechnical methods to get ahead of the curve, because I could see that no matter which synthetic miticide comes out, it's going to have a limited life. And I'm just tired of being on that treadmill of having your miticide fail every few years. Well, it was a tough learning curve. It's tough to keep bees without the synthetic miticides, and it took me a few years to get successful at it. And nowadays, we're just fine. We haven't used a synthetic miticide since the year 2000. We use the Thymol, the Apigard gel. We use formic acid, and we use oxalic acid dribble at appropriate times of the year. It's all detailed on my basic beekeeping page on my website under the beginner section, and we're very happy with it. So it also allows us to sell our nukes and our honey and our beeswax. It's hard. We can't get organic registration certification because we're in an it's almost impossible to get that in the United States anywhere, because there's a chance they might be exposed to pesticides somewhere.
Yeah.
But we can certainly we can say that our combs don't have synthetic miticides in them, and that our honey is free of synthetic miticides, and so we have a sales advantage to doing that. So we utilize that to get the premium to do that. Plus, personally, I like having those combs free. One of the things is what beekeepers have to realize: it's not just Varroa. When you start loading your combs up with miticide residues, now you've raised the baseline for any other agricultural pesticide impact. That the bees are first having to deal with detoxifying their 24/7, 365 exposure to residues from miticides in the combs, and then on top of that, any other agricultural chemical is added. And what I find in our operation, our queen survival rate is far higher than it is for other beekeepers I hear of in the United States. We have fewer problems, and it's not because I'm any kind of special beekeeper or anything like that. I think that just by having the clean combs that are free of miticide and pesticide residues, that our bees are just healthier for it.
Yeah, so I think we call that in New Zealand organically managed.
Okay, organically managed. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I don't call myself an organic beekeeper by any means, but we are organically managed beekeepers. And I guess we couldn't say organic because when we feed sugar syrup to them, it's not organic sugar syrup. We just buy plain old sugar. Here in the United States, we also have an option of getting these syrup blends, which are half sucrose and half high fructose corn syrup, which makes a really nice blend for the bees. The bees do extremely well on it. So it's 50% sucrose, roughly 25% glucose, and 25% fructose, and it works very well for the bees. I know you don't have that available to you there, although I know I have met some beekeepers in New Zealand who do inversion of sugar with citric acid. So we have more options over here than you do on some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and do you find the fructose corn syrup harms the bees or causes them any troubles?
Well, that's a generic question.
Yeah.
If you say okay, it depends. It all depends on who makes the syrup, where it comes from, and if you test when the USDA lab tested high fructose corn syrup with bees with cage trials, and they brought syrup in from 6 different sources, some had problems and some didn't. So the beekeeping or the suppliers to the bee industry only use syrups that have shown that the bees are okay with it, and the bees do fine. And when you say with high fructose corn syrup, it's not just fructose; it's half fructose. Well, if it's type 55, it's 55% fructose and 45% glucose. So it's a mixture of the two.
Yeah,
but what we use is a mixture of all 3 sugars.
Okay. Oh, so that's. So do people in America feed only fructose corn syrup or not? Or they all use a blend? Or use a blend, do they?
No. A lot don't feed at all. I went 25 years, never fed a drop of syrup to my bees. I just moved my bees to pasture from one pasture to the next for the year.
Yeah.
That's the best way. I mean, it's way cheaper than feeding, and it's less work. You put the bees in the truck and you move them to better pasture. So that'd be my number one recommendation. Let the bees feed themselves with natural nectar.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we found is as we increased our numbers, I became more of a truck driver than a beekeeper. I didn't enjoy that lifestyle as much. So we did switch to here in the Sierra foothills. We may go for 5 to 6 months during the winter without a single drop of rain. During the summer, I should say, without a single drop of rain.
Yeah.
It's not at all unusual to go for 3 months with no rainfall whatsoever. So it's a dry summer habitat, which is rough for bees. When there's no rain, you don't get the bloom. So the bees, since we got Varroa, it was hard keeping bees alive over the summer here in the foothills, which is why we moved them out to irrigated pasture elsewhere. When I then decided to stop driving trucks so much and take care of my bees, we experimented with feeding sugar syrups and feeding protein patties, and found out, we could keep the bees healthy here. And instead of driving all the time, you get up each day and you hit a few yards locally. So all of our yards are fairly close to home. We got about 45 yards of bees, and we hit a few of them a day, and we just bring them food instead. And it's not natural, it's not perfect, but it works. And the bees are healthy, and we take good strong colonies to almonds. So I have learned a lot about artificial feeding of bees. Now back to your question, what can we feed? Easiest thing is just to make your own sucrose syrup. Just get white granulated sugar and make sucrose syrup. And we do a lot of that. We do have an hour and a half away from us. We have a bee supplier where we can take a truck down and pick up a tote of I can't remember what you call totes there. The big 275-gallon tanks.
We call them barrels kind of thing. You mean it's that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's some other. There's a 3-letter acronym you call them with. Anyway, we call them totes over here. Anyway, we can go down there. We can pick up 275 gallons of 70% sugar syrup, the blend, the sucrose, fructose, glucose blend, because it is able to have a very high sugar content, higher than sucrose alone, and it doesn't tend to granulate, which is a huge advantage to it. And then bring that back. So it's easier. So we trade off. If we're going to be feeding a lot, we just go down and get totes of pre-made syrup. If we're just feeding a small amount, we make sucrose syrup ourselves. So, and then there are some beekeepers that feed straight high fructose corn syrup. So it's across the board, all different ways. There's no one for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, if the bees are starving, you've got to do something, don't you? You can't just let them all die.
I have not seen any negative effect from feeding high fructose corn syrup. I mean, that's again, depending on the source. If you have a good source, if it hasn't been overheated, if it's clear in color, if it's been kept in a plastic container, if it hasn't been held at high temperature, any of those things, you can get hydroxymethylfurfural chemical reaction that creates this, and you can have problems with that. There was a big kill incident here in California a few years ago from overheated high fructose corn syrup. But high fructose corn syrup alone does not mean that it's any problem for honeybees.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's good. Thanks for that. And we've got another question here from Roy Arborn. He's a beekeeper in the west coast of New Zealand. And he's asked, do you think changing the cell size, going to 4.9, matters to varroa tolerance?
It certainly does not seem to have any effect. Of all the trials ever run, I'm the only one who's ever come up with results that suggested it might help. That's a trial I ran with a plastic, fully drawn combs called Honey Supercell. And I suspect that the results may have to do more with outgassing from the plastic or something from the cell size.
Yeah.
Because it looked promising, but no study ever done before or after that has ever found any benefit from small cell size. Now, there are people who it's more like a religious belief than than scientific, and it's hard. So, I don't try to change anybody's religion. So if your religious belief is that small cell size was the best thing ever invented in beekeeping, my God, go for that religious belief.
Yeah.
But it's not a belief that's backed up by any scientific data or practical experience that I've ever seen anywhere, nor is it at all natural for bees. There's a paper just came out 2 issues ago in Journal Apicultural Research where the whole founding of the small cell culture was based upon erroneous interpretation of some of the old data on how you calculate cell size. So the standard cell size is a natural size for European bees. Now, Africanized bees, they use a smaller cell size. And feral colonies, if they tend to make smaller cells in the center of the cluster, they make smaller cells if they're hungry. And they make larger cells if food is abundant. And they make larger cells on the outside of the cluster. So there's nothing natural about the 4.9 whatsoever. You will find some of that in the parts of a naturally built combs, but it is certainly not universal. And I've cut apart a lot of natural combs built by bees and looked at it, and the standard 5.4, 5.3 around there. That's a natural comb for European bees.
Okay. So you think that's a myth that they actually made them smaller in the past? It's interesting.
Yeah, that you read the paper. Yes, I would say yes. It's a myth.
Who wrote that article? I'll be interested to read that one.
This guy named hang on, I'll have it in 1 second. Saucy, Saucy, and Journal Apiculture Research. I think 2 issues ago. It may even be open access. If not, email me and see what we can do, and then you can share the results with your listeners.
Yeah, I'll look that up. I mean, it's really quite, because we actually subscribe on the iPad, and it's really cheap to get the American Bee Journal. So it's it works out to be like.
And I'll tell you something else. Now, be careful. If you, I was searching for the paper one day.
Yeah.
And so I put in Saucy, which is his name, in search.
Yeah.
And up comes on the search, one of them says, Saucy Wench Outfit. And intrigued, I thought, well, what is a Saucy Wench outfit? So I made the mistake of clicking on that. And there are outfits for women, Saucy Wench outfits that are pretty sexy looking.
Yeah.
But what it does, I'm warning you right now, is the next time you do any search on the internet with your wife looking over your shoulder, up will pop all the images of Saucy Wench outfits.
Yeah.
And your wife may ask you what you're doing looking at the pictures of Saucy Wench outfits. So, yes, the guy's name is Saucy, but he's not a saucy wench. Don't click on that one.
Be careful what you click on. Exactly. Oh, yeah, that's funny. Okay, and we've got another question here from a person called Frazzled. It's an interesting name. I don't think that's their real name. They might be looking at some strange stuff on the internet, but let's see. So they saying there, are there any truly varroa tolerant bees in the US? You kind of sort of touched on that before, that don't need to be heavily split, and if so, are they used in commercial operations?
Well, yes, there are.
Okay.
Varroa tolerant bees in the U.S. The Africanized bees are completely varroa tolerant. They still have varroa, but they deal with it well.
Yeah.
But they're not a bee that you would want to keep. Now and I have also kept bees that are completely varroa tolerant. It's hard to maintain that germline of the bees because they outcross, they lose that. The Russian stocks some of them are completely varroa tolerant. Other ones aren't. The Russian stock kept by the USDA program by the Russian queen breeders are all maintained with no treatments whatsoever. So they keep bees with no treatments. Also, the VSH line can be kept with no treatments. The problem is maintaining it. Unless you're getting purebred queens from either of those lines, they get outbred, and after a generation or so, they lose their Varroa resistance. The other thing that's interesting is I'm seeing a lot of beekeepers who are keeping. We've had Varroa long enough. When it first came through, it wiped out the feral population of bees around 1995 through 97. It just wiped out the feral population. Well, now, what is it? So 95, 2002. So it's been like 18 years or so since then. The feral population is coming back in some areas, and beekeepers who are keeping those feral stocks by, instead of buying commercial stocks, catching swarms, taking cutouts, a number of them are saying that they're doing just fine with those bees with no treatments at all. And I visited them, and as far as I can tell, that's legitimate. There are stocks of bees that are dealing with Varroa on their own. Their colony loss rates are no higher than typical commercial loss rates, and the beekeepers practice no treatments. One of the things is most of those guys keep smaller numbers of colonies. As you keep more colonies in an apiary or in an operation, Varroa becomes much more of a problem. So if you only have 2 or 3 hives in a yard, you might be able to get by just fine with no treatments if you have resistant stock. You put 25, 50, 100 colonies in the same yard, then Varroa becomes a problem, even with the same bees. So, and also how close your colonies are spaced. If your colonies, there's a study recently completed by Dr. Tom Seeley, where he set up 2 yards, one with colonies close together and one with colonies spaced a few yards apart. The Varroa was a much greater problem in the colonies spaced close together than the colonies spaced far apart. So the thing is, people always they ask these beautiful, simple questions about beekeeping, and they think you're going to give them a beautiful, simple answer. I'll tell you right now, there are no simple answers to any question in beekeeping. And it's kind of a joke with people when I give presentations and we start question and answer sessions. After about the 3rd answer, they realize it's hard for me to answer any beekeeping question in less than 10 minutes because there's just so much involved, and you think it's going to be a real simple, one-sentence answer. Anybody who gives you one-sentence answer has not investigated the question enough or to give you the full answer. Yeah,
exactly. Unless your answer is it depends, I guess.
Yeah, right. Depends. Yeah, that's a cop-out answer.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, exactly. Absolutely.
The short answer is, there are stocks of bees that are resistant to Varroa, can handle it on their own if given decent conditions and not crowded too much.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
But it's not one that I have been able to perfect in my operation yet. That's certainly my goal that I will be able to keep bees with no treatment someday. We haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's the best approach, isn't it? If we can get to that stage. Yeah. So
just keep that goal in mind. Now, the other thing is, for commercial beekeepers, if you are a commercial dairyman, you don't want to go out and find wild cattle to try to milk. You're going to keep cattle that are bred for domestic production. If you're raising broiler chickens, you don't want to keep wild chickens, the jungle fowl. What you want to keep is a hybrid broiler breed, Cornish cross hybrid.
Yeah.
And if you're a commercial beekeeper, as long as the mite treatments work, then you might want to keep domesticated commercial stock. They're the productive, gentle stock that way. If, on the other hand, you are a recreational beekeeper with a few hives in your backyard and you don't want to do that full kind of management you have to do to keep a Holstein dairy cattle, or to keep, did I say Holsteins last time? I hope. Or to keep Cornish cross chickens alive. Neither of those are a well-adapted stocks for living in the wild, but they're very good for commercial production. Well, you have the same choice with honeybees. Do you want to do the husbandry necessary and keep a highly productive, gentle commercial stock, or do you want to keep a stock that takes care of Varroa on their own, is adapted to your local environment, but may not produce as much honey and may not be as easy to work? That's questions that the beekeeper needs to ask himself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you touch on Africanized bees. I mean, who wants to have to deal with that every day? It's just...
Well, not me,
No.
but I visited operations down in Southern California that are all Africanized there. It's not like everyone attacks you. It's you have to be a little more careful. I put a veil on. If I had to do big production, I'd probably have to put gloves on too. But the occasional colony can be really, really nasty. So, the question is, can you breed them to be a little less touchy? And when I talk to the beekeepers from Central and South America, they say, if you start working with those Africanized bees, you can start breeding bees that you can then keep wearing a T-shirt, and they're not so bad. So bees are a very plastic species, which means biologically plastic means they're very adaptable. You can select for different traits. So we tend to leave it up to a very few breeders to do all of our breeding for us. There's no reason for that. If you can control a population of bees, if you can control 1,000 colonies of bees either in a group or by yourself and control your meetings, then you can breed bees to do pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's a program in Western Australia at the moment. They're trying to do that, trying to breed Africanized bees that make them, less angry. But variety
in Australia,
yeah.
They're not breeding Africanized bees in Australia, are they?
I think it's at a DNA level. So I'm not sure if they're actually breeding them or they're just studying the DNA, something like that.
Introducing Africanized bees to Australia would be a very, very, very bad idea.
it would be insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one more user question from Jean in Manawatu. She says, what is your recommendation regarding comb management for residue and optimum level of drone comb in the hive for drone presence? Because I know you do drone management, don't you?
Yeah, well, we do. So the question is, what about drone management or comb management?
I think it's like a double question. It's like, I think about comb management probably for stuff like, pesticide residues.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I can answer both those questions. What we do is a large part of our income is selling nucleus colonies. We've I wouldn't say perfected, but we've got making nukes down. We can make nukes very, very fast. We're like an assembly line. And so we bring our hives back from almonds and we split every single colony 5 ways to make we have 20 frames in a deep box. We run 10 frames in a box. So we get 5 4-frame nukes out of a box, out of a hive. Out of that, typically 4 out of 5 made out. So then we combine them down to 4 5-frame nukes. So by the time we're done mating, every strong colony has now been made into 4 new colonies with fresh queens.
Yeah.
And then we keep what we need and we sell off the rest. So we simply sell off a half to a third of our brood combs every season. So that takes care of our comb rotation. So in answer to your question, we sell all of our combs to other people and constantly rotate it.
That's a good idea.
Rotate them out. Now, we're not selling junk combs. We sell nothing but high-quality combs because we've been doing this forever. So we don't have any old combs. All our comb turnover is so fast that all of our combs are beautiful. Now, this brings us to the next question, which is drone management. What we did is we tried putting in drone trap frames, and the frame I use is a special design. It's on my website that has a section that the bees are free to just draw a natural comb, and if you put it in the right place, they will draw a drone comb almost 100% of the time there. We thought we'd use it as a varroa management tool, and it does work for that. Small scale, it works fairly well. You can just cut out the drone comb. Large scale, what we found was it was handy doing that. But of greater benefit, we found when we put drone trap frames in there, the bees stopped reworking worker comb into drone comb. That was beautiful because when we sell nukes, people prefer to buy nukes that are made with frames that have no drone comb in it. There's just 100% worker comb. So it revolutionized our nuke making. So now we run. Biologically, it's stupid to think that you can put 20 combs worker foundation in a hive, and the bees will maintain 20 combs worker foundation. Bees won't do that. They're going to make 10 to 15% drone comb no matter what.
Yeah.
So So what we do, if you just provide them with one comb in a hive, in every hive, to put their drone comb in, you manage where the drone comb is.
Yeah, good idea.
And they don't build it between the boxes, and they don't build it in the comb, so you have clean combs and you manage where your drone comb is. So we like that a whole lot. It gives you the option also of, if that drone comb becomes infested with varroa, you can cut it out and stick it back in. The bees will rebuild it. Or you can just run a capping fork across it and just kill all those drones, and that kills a lot of the mites. And when the bees clean it up, it stops that mite reproduction. Then you can put it right back in. So that kills two birds with one stone for us. That we manage where they build it. The drone comb, it's actually kills three birds with one stone. Manage where they build it. It gives us better combs, and we also use it for mite management. Oh, actually, four things. We also can control our matings. When we come back from almonds, when we split, any colonies that we do not want those drones to contribute to our matings, we just pull out the drone comb and kill all the drones in the hive before they hatch out. Yeah. So you can better control your breeding stock.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. We use those as well. They're really good idea. Really great. It was one of the ideas we got from you, actually. So,
oh, wonderful.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think it's great idea about getting a comb out. I think in one of your articles you say that every time you split a hive, you give half your mites to someone else, don't you?
Yep.
That was one of your comments.
If you split it 4 ways, you're giving 3/4 of them to somebody else.
Exactly. And then that kind of touches on, there's a guy, Dennis Crowley from the Bay of Plenty. He's asking, do you use queens, or how do you do when you make your splits? Do you use queens or cells?
We use cells, and the reason, because one, we rarely put a queen in the cage. Okay, queens are really cheap to raise. I've got about a minute total of my time in raising a queen cell. Okay, when we mass produce queen cells, I got about a minute into a queen cell. A queen cell costs me very, very little. Now, if I put that queen cell in the nuke and the queen mates out, she's laying, I've still got only a minute of my time invested in that queen. The queen costs me essentially nothing. The cost of the queen is involved in the finding, the catching, the marking, putting her in the cage, handling the cage, transferring around. That's where the queen gets expensive, is in the handling. So we just never handle queens. We just handle those nukes instead. The queen just stays in the nuke that we raised the queen in, and we just use those nukes to either requeen a colony or to just build those nukes up to strength. We'll boost nukes. We add frames of bees to those nukes. We work backwards from our first main honey flow. And we know how many weeks in advance of that flow, how strong a nucleus colony needs to be. So our nukes that we make very early in the season, a 5-frame nuke will build up big enough to make a honey crop. Nukes 2 weeks later, they got to be a 6-frame nuke. By 3 weeks later, they got to be a 7-frame nuke. And if you make your nukes just before the honey crop, then you want to make a 10-frame nuke. So we do that by mating out our queens in small nukes and then adding bees to them to build them up to size depending upon the time. The other advantage of using queen cells in a nuke is you get that brood break, which one allows you to do that oxalic dribble and knock your mites back. The second thing is there's something about a brood break in a hive that I think it stops the transmission of pathogens and parasites. So I think maybe some of the virus dynamics, maybe the bacterial dynamics, by having that brood break, letting those cells go without any fresh generation of brood for the 12 days or so, the colonies start off real nice, and those queens start off with these fantastic patterns. So we like that brood break.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming up to the end of the interview here. Have you got enough time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what do you think's the biggest issue facing beekeeping in your area at the moment? I guess the drought, isn't it? Probably, but
in my area, well, nutrition is always number one. I mean, people think that you can just put a beehive anywhere and they're going to take care of themselves. Well, that's kind of silly. You can't just take a herd of cattle and put them anywhere on Earth and think they're going to take care of themselves. You got to find a place where there's food for them. So why people think you can do the same with a beehive? Prior to Varroa, when there was already an established feral population of bees anywhere, that's like putting a herd of cattle on top of an existing established herd of cattle. Well, the land had the bee population had already reached the carrying capacity prior to you starting another hive. So when you add another hive, this is the tragedy of the commons. You're overpopulating that particular pasture for the carrying capacity, which means you're going to have to give supplemental feed in the rest of the season once the honey flow is over, or to move those bees somewhere else. It's not like you can just magically just put a beehive out and suddenly there's enough food to support another hive. So nutrition is always the huge issue. When you have very good nutrition coming into the hive, any fool can be a good beekeeper. It's hard to kill a hive when you got plenty of nutrition coming in. It's when nutrition becomes poor, when the pollen flow drops off. Well, that's when varroa becomes the major problem. That's when you start getting other virus and other pathogen issues in hives. So nutrition is a huge thing. And then the varroa is the other. Varroa is with the varroa virus dynamics. It just changed everything. And we're in the middle of this evolutionary process right now, watching the bees slowly adapt to varroa. Now, for us, that's frustrating. When we first got chalkroot, it took just a few years for the bees to adapt to chalkroot. When we got the tracheomite, it took just a few years for the bees to adapt to tracheomite. They're adapting to small hive beetle. It's taken a long time with varroa, far longer than I or anybody else expected. I thought I'd have varroa-resistant bees in just a few years, and I'm not seeing that. It's a tough bugger. I'm totally optimistic that one of these days we're going to have varroa-resistant bees. I've seen varroa-resistant bees. I've seen the future. I know that it's possible. So it's just a matter of shifting the genetics of our populations over to varroa resistance. But it's going to take coordination of the bee industry. As long as we are propagating non-varroa resistant bees, it's hard to develop varroa resistant bees.
Yeah, and some people even say that, treatments are actually like a crutch to them, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Treatments are a crutch. It slows down the evolutionary process. But if we didn't use treatments, we'd all be out of business.
Exactly.
And there'd be no bee industry.
There'd be no bees, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's there'd be bees. There would have been feral colonies. They would have survived, but there wouldn't have been beekeepers. There's a difference between bees. When this whole CCD thing, it's not about bees. The bees aren't going to go extinct. It's about beekeepers. Yeah. That whether the beekeepers can stay in business. So we have this trade-off. It's not a perfect world. And in fact, I've got an article I'm working on. It's called "An Idealistic Beekeeper in a Realistic World," and it's how you do this. How certainly we can be idealistic about what we want to do, but then you got reality of, man, if you're going to make a living at doing this, you need a much more sober, pragmatic way of looking at beekeeping. So that's all based upon value judgments and drawing lines and what you want to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. It's just you can't keep them alive, can you? You can't make a living out of dead bees, can you?
Nope.
Yeah, true. And so, it's probably a big question, but what do you think's causing CCD in your opinion in America?
Well, we don't. CCD is a specific set of field signs. The sudden depopulation of the colony. The adult bees leaving behind brood. We saw that during the late first decade, from about 2004 to about 2008, we saw a fair amount of CCD. I saw it in my operation. I would say most operations, it was attributed to various viruses, mainly Israeli acute paralysis virus, some Lake Sinai virus, in combination with Nosema ceranae. Nosema ceranae invaded us and just exploded at that time. And in my operation, and many I looked at, it was very much involved. We were able to create CCD in situ in a trial by isolating a strain of Israeli acute paralysis virus that was very virulent. We cultured it in bee pupae, purified it, and then inoculated healthy colonies with it, and we created all the signs of CCD. It's the only trial ever done on the planet where anybody's actually created CCD signs, symptoms, in a controlled trial by inoculating with a pathogen. So it was really clear to me, what caused it. That wave passed. we don't see much of that anymore. The only time I see colonies collapsing now is either if Nosema ceranae and or Lake Cyanide virus or one of the other acute viruses is involved. And I see that every spring. There's a few colonies. And it's not Nosema ceranae that is the initiator. It's the coup de grace. When a colony starts to decline due to viruses, then at the last minute when they can no longer thermoregulate well, at that point then the Nosema ceranae finally takes them down. But most beekeepers aren't seeing much of that anymore. The colonies are being lost for other reasons, and it's gotten people are saying CCD, but it's not CCD at all. They should just call elevated colony mortality. Now, not all beekeepers are experiencing this. Many beekeepers in the U.S. are not experiencing that kind of mortality. I myself am not experiencing that. We run these controlled trials. So, like, I ran a trial last winter or year before of 150 of our worst colonies, the very worst colonies we had, the sickest colonies we had. And over the winter, we had like 148 of them survive. This last year, I ran another trial of, even more colonies than that. And again, we have, like survival in the 98th percentile. So we don't see those kind of losses. One, I suspect, is because we do take care of our bees. But two is I think we don't have the miticide residues in the comb, and we don't have much pesticide exposure. There are beekeepers, I can tell you right now, in the middle of the American Corn Belt with the full neonicotinoid exposure that have very, very, very low losses. I don't see any on-the-ground correlation between neonicotinoid exposure and colony loss rate. I do see it with exposure to other insecticides. I feel that the turning of our attention, the tunnel vision focus on the neonicotinoids detracts from what we should be looking at, which is the impacts of all pesticides put together. So I'm not on the anti-neonic bandwagon at all. They're an insecticide. Yes, they can cause problems, but I don't see any evidence that they're any worse than the other insecticides. And in many ways, if properly applied, they're probably a whole lot better for the environment than some of the other insecticides. So I think a lot of the activism of some beekeepers is misdirected towards the neonicotinoids. Yeah,
so do you think it's better just to have, try and look at all pesticides as a big family?
Absolutely, yes. Protest pesticides in general. We're not going to stop using pesticides. There's no way. Just that we're not. No, agriculture is not going to go all organic. Deal with that. Okay, I've been an organic gardener all my whole life. Okay, I got 100 fruit trees. I got a huge garden. We feed ourselves, and we're organic. But I can tell you right now, organic farming is not going to take over agriculture. They're going to be using pesticides. So deal with that. So the best we can hope for is more integrated pest management, better use of pesticides, better regulation of pesticides. Focusing only on the neonics does not serve us well. Anything you say about the neonics should just be applied to all pesticides. Our regulatory agencies should look at those. The guys who are doing the regulation, they know what they're doing. They read all the science. They know a whole lot more than any beekeeper does about it. And I speak to our regulatory agencies regularly, to the guys who are doing the risk assessment. I look at their data. I look at their papers. I look at their analyses. They're doing an okay job. Not a perfect job. I disagree with a few things, but the focus on the neonics is clearly tunnel vision. And I encourage beekeepers not to get stuck in that tunnel vision.
Yeah. I mean, your recent article about that was quite interesting, and you're talking about the Dr. Liu study. That was quite a good, dissection of it all. Yeah,
there's some science that is just so poorly done that it's a joke. But unfortunately, the media doesn't realize how poorly done it is, and they publish this stuff, and then on the internet, everybody reads this stuff and thinks that it had any validity whatsoever when it was just junk, absolute junk, and that's unfortunate. I don't know. I guess Lou likes being in the spotlight, rushes off the moment he's done before he publishes anything, and makes sure he has a press conference and he knows he's going to get media attention. But all the scientists just shake their head and say, what in the world? Here's all these great bee researchers out there that nobody pays attention to, and this publicity hound from Harvard Medical School gets all this attention because he knows how to work the media.
I guess he's trying to find the cause of the CCD, and I think that's the media are very receptive to trying to find that single cause, aren't they?
Right.
I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what he's trying to do. What he apparently seems to be doing is to try to link the neonicotinoids to some kind of human health issue, and he's a human toxicologist, and then I admire him for that. But I think he should stick to humans. And if it's a human health issue, I would like to know that. I would support him completely in following up on that research. But he has no business working with honeybees.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because we had Dr. Hank Tenicus on recently about his work.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay, well,
yeah. It was good.
He and I have had very long discussions on his books, his research, and me asking him because he really got my attention also. So I in one of his books, one of the publishers asked me to review his book. So I did an open email correspondence back and forth for quite a while with Dr. Tenicus, copying the head of the EPA risk assessment and copying the editors of both bee journals, and asked him point by point to support his hypotheses on the birds, on the water, on everything else. And he was unable to support any of it with data. And the book never even made it to review in the bee journals here because the editors saw, hey, he had nothing to stand on. So I appreciate people bringing environmental concerns to our attention. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool environmentalist. I donate heavily to environmental causes. But I think environmentalists should hold ourselves to a higher standard than the industry, like the pesticide industry. We expect them to favor themselves, paint themselves in a good light. And we expect not to trust everything they say. We want to check it. Well, I feel environmentalists should go be better than that. We should check ourselves. And by allowing things like loose paper by Henneke's fear-mongering, and that's what it is. It's fear-mongering to stand out there. We do a disservice to the public who really wants to help the environment. And we should demand that they back up their statements with actual data, the same way we would demand the pesticide registrants to back up their statements with actual data. And if their fear messages don't stand up to scrutiny, then we should not support them because people have plenty of stuff to be afraid of. There's people in California that won't eat fresh produce because they're so afraid of pesticides, despite the fact that when the USDA tests them off the shelf of the supermarkets, they show the levels of if there's any at all, the levels are so low, they're not going to hurt you. So people hurt their own health by, instead of eating a healthy diet of fresh fruits and vegetables because they're afraid of pesticides, they eat other food instead. So it's people misinterpret the messages, and most people aren't going to do the science. Most people aren't going to do their homework and actually read the data. I found the same thing with the GMO issue. That I read the books and I saw the movies on the anti-GMO ones, and they scared the snot out of me. Man, I thought, how in the world? I mean, really, these guys are really good at selling fear. So then what I did what most people don't do. You go to the back of the book and you look at all the references they used for all the studies they used that they based what their statements on. And then I read the original studies, and I found out the emperor has no clothes. These people with the anti-GMO movement, they got nothing to stand on. The data's not there. There's a ton of scientific data showing how safe these foods actually are. The world's not perfect, but the promise of genetic engineering for organic farming, for coming up with crops that we don't have to use pesticides on, for crops that are drought tolerant, the crops that are naturally pest resistant, the promise is incredible. So I think, again, the anti-GMO movement is largely misguided, being based upon people selling fear, because fear sells. Fear sells very well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's like, stories about car crashes sell better, don't they? So it's true.
Stories like what? Like what?
Oh, bad news sells. Like, stories about car crashes and murders and stuff like that. It's all.
Oh God, yes. All that sells. There's just a paper just released from UC Davis, University of California, Davis, where the researchers did the obvious, what I call ground truthing. And the obvious is there's been 100 billion. That's a number inconceivable to humans. number of livestock, individual livestock, raised on diets of genetically engineered crops over the last 15 years. So this researcher compared the health and survival statistics of those animals, those livestock, prior to genetically engineered plants in their diet, and then post using genetically engineered plants. If genetically engineered plants had any negative impact on organisms that eat them, you would see that in the livestock. Guys who grow livestock, chickens and pigs and cattle, they're not going to feed them something that harms their livestock and cuts back on their profits. Well, what she found was the health of livestock has improved over these last years, rather than gone downhill. There's no basis in fact for this fear that genetically engineered crops are causing harm to either livestock or human beings. So that's ground truthing. That's looking at actual, real data on a large scale. So
yeah,
and that's what I would suggest people do. Do a reality check on these things.
Absolutely. I think people, don't just read the headline, read the actual studies and read the actual documents.
Read the studies, yeah. Or
absolutely.
Find somebody who's willing to do it for you and get an opposing point of view, a more realistic point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's been recently a case in New Zealand where over 300 cows were killed by eating genetically modified Swedes. So that they're still not sure what caused that. It's just still very new. It only happened a couple of weeks ago. So that's going to be interesting to look at for that too. I
would be very interested. In fact, follow me up on that, because I've looked at there were reports in, like from India of cattle or goats dying after going into the cleaning up the cotton, after genetically modified cotton. And I looked at and of course the activists say, oh yeah, they died from eating the genetically modified cotton plants. Well, what you got to do is then read the actual veterinary reports from the veterinarians that went out there, and they said, no, that's not what killed them at all. They got killed by either pesticide issues or other issues unrelated to the genetically engineered crops whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do your homework. Check.
Yeah.
Do your fact checks.
Yeah, I mean, this is still very fresh, but at the moment it's all liver damage. But they're gonna try and do autopsies and stuff like that.
Yep.
So, and try. I mean, it may not be related to what they ate. It might be something else. But who knows?
Yeah.
We'll find out in the
Interesting.
future.
No, but you probably won't, because if it's a negative finding, the media will not cover it.
Oh, absolutely.
You very likely will not find out the truth unless you actually do your homework and find out, because the media only wants to cover the story. Oh, it looks like genetically engineered crops killed these cattle. And then that's it. You won't hear a retraction later on, because the media is not interested in saying, oh yeah, they died from something else.
Yeah, no, that's very true. The first story comes out, but other stories don't. But I'll be following it up there for you, Randy. So.
Yeah, let me know.
Hopefully they'll publish that, and we'll see what happens. It never made the major news here. It was just like the rural farming news kind of thing. So
yep,
absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. And so, what are your plans for the next season?
Well, every year we try to learn something, so we don't do the same stupid things more than 2 years in a row.
That's good advice.
We try not to even do it 2 years in a row, but usually it takes about 2 years of repeating stupid mistakes. Then we finally it sinks in and we get better. We figured out a new way of making our splits, which will save us a whole lot of time. It's all about time. The more efficiently you use your time, the better a beekeeper you can be, and if you're in the business, the more profitable it is. So I figured out a way to be much more efficient in that. We're trying to continue to play with mite treatments to use them more efficiently. And we're doing a lot of research right now on feeding protein supplements and figure out the most effective way of feeding protein supplements, and in developing protein supplements that are better for the bees and less expensive. I'm working with a major manufacturer and working with one of the research labs on doing that.
Wow, fantastic! And this will all be at Scientific Beekeeping.
Eventually gets there. I generally publish things first in the American Bee Journal, and then once it's published, I post them up to the Scientific Beekeeping.
Oh, fantastic! Well, thanks very, very much, Ronnie. It's been fantastic having you on the show, and you've shared some great information here, and I'm sure people will listen to this many times. So it's been fantastic. And thanks for that, and enjoy the rest of your day, eh?
Well, thanks a lot.
Well,
Okay.
thanks everyone for listening. And this show notes for this one will be kiwimana.co.nz/Randy.